9. Epictetus's Stoic principles through Husserl's phenomenology. 1. Introduction. Through the dichotomy of control, Epictetus's philosophy provides a powerful mental weapon for modern individuals. Living in an era of information overload and anxiety, his teaching reduces emotional exhaustion and protects inner self-esteem. It is namely to focus solely on one's own judgment and will, rather than becoming consumed by external environments or the evaluations of others that we cannot change. This is not mere resignation, but a practical wisdom that directs our limited energy toward what I can change. His thought, which pursues an unshakable tranquility of mind, namely ataraxia in any situation, became the root of modern cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and reminds us that true freedom lies not in external possessions, but in our internal choices. My thesis is that the principle of Epictetus's Stoic philosophy can be interpreted through the modern philosophy, namely that of Husserl's phenomenology. Husserl's phenomenology is famous for its scientific rigidity, and without presupposition, reinterpreting Epictetus through a phenomenological lens allows for a profound reevaluation of classical Stoic doctrine, revealing its timeless relevance. The convergence of Husserl's 20th century phenomenology and Epictetus's 1st and 2nd century Stoicism offers a profound framework for modern subjectivity. By linking the Stoic dichotomy of control with Husserlian epoche, we find a shared method of bracketing the uncontrollable external realities to reclaim the sovereignty of the internal domain. I've brought a key excerpt from the opening of the Enchiridion. Let's break down what Epictetus is really trying to tell us. Below is the excerpt from the text.
Some things are up to us and some are not up to us. Up to us are opinion, impulse, desire, aversion. In a word, whatever is our own doing. Not up to us are our body, property, reputation, office. In a word, whatever is not our own doing. Some things are in our control and others not in our control. In our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Not in our control are body, property, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions. The things in our control are by nature free, unrestrained, unhindered. But those not in our control are weak, slavish, restrained, belonging to others.
This foundational principle of Epictetus, known as the dichotomy of control, serves as the cornerstone of Stoic ethics. Its core message is that human happiness and freedom depend entirely on our ability to distinguish between internal and external variables. The dichotomy of control is the essence of Stoic resilience. It divides the world into two realms, the internal and the external. Namely, the former includes our opinion, desire, and will, and the latter includes body, wealth, and reputation. The dichotomy of control is the ultimate act of internal sovereignty. It is the boundary where the chaos of the world ends and the empire of the mind begins. The dichotomy of control mirrors the structure of religious deliverance, providing a final solution, not by altering external reality, but by an absolute inward transformation. How could Epictetus, a man born into the chains of slavery, endure years of physical bondage without breaking? We can imagine that the dichotomy of control was not a mere academic theory for him, but a desperate, life-sustaining fortress of the mind, while his body belonged to Epaphroditus, namely, his cruel master. Epictetus likely realized early on that his prohairesis, namely his faculty of choice, remained an unassailable sanctuary. When he was hungry, beaten, or humiliated, he practiced a form of proto-phenomenological reduction. He would bracket the physical pain and the external insults, viewing them as not up to him. By doing so, he stripped his master of the power to disturb his inner peace. Imagine the moment his master broke his leg. Instead of cursing fate, Epictetus might have whispered to himself, "The leg is hindered, but the will is not. unless it wills to be. This is the essence of ataraxia, through the sovereignty of meaning. He understood that the perceived, viz., the slavery is constituted by the perceiving, viz., the judgment. By refusing to judge his slavery as an absolute evil, he remained a free man in a bound body. His endurance was rooted in a secular salvation. He found a final solution to his suffering, not by escaping his chains, but by an absolute inward transformation. For Epictetus, the dichotomy of control functioned as a noetic shield. It was the boundary where the chaos of the slave-master dynamic ended, and the empire of his own reason began. He did not merely survive slavery. He transcended it by becoming the transcendental subject of his own reality, proving that true power lies in knowing exactly where the world's edge meets the soul's beginning. Epictetus's dichotomy of control can be compared with Husserl's epoché, that is, suspension or bracketing of the objective world. Philosophical method of Husserl's phenomenology consists in epoché, which suspends the exterior reality of life world. Can Epictetus's dichotomy of control and Husserl's epoché converge? While originating from different eras, they align through the sovereignty of the subject. Epictetus's dichotomy is a practical bracketing of externals, the ukaphemin, urging us to withdraw assent from things we cannot control. Similarly, Husserl's epoché is a methodological suspension of the natural attitude, bracketing the external world to focus on how meaning is constituted within the transcendental ego. Both reach a shared sumi, namely, the world is no longer a source of blind compulsion, but a field of constituted meaning. When we stop assenting to external labels, Stoicism and bracket the existence of the world. Phenomenology. We recover the noetic power to legislate our own internal reality. In this synthesis, the fully educated person becomes the ultimate constitutor of peace, proving that mental sovereignty is achieved when we cease to blame the transcendent and master the immanent. Hypoche is also similar to the phenomenological reduction. While the former emphasizes the negative moment of extrinsic visible world, the latter the positive moment of immanent consciousness. Epictetus argues that suffering arises when we try to control the external, which is governed by fate. Epictetus tried to escape from the external, namely, what is not up to us, in order to reach the realm of freedom, namely, the interior, the ethical, existential division of the interior. And the exterior refers to the epistemological division of the immanent and the transcendent, namely, subject and object in the phenomenology, prohairesis as moral choice. Epictetus's concept of prohairesis is an indomitable faculty of us. The world may bind your limbs, but it can never shackle your prohairesis. Therefore, prohairesis is something that even Zeus cannot conquer. Whenever you feel obstructed or unsettled, remember that the source lies not in the world, but in the sanctuary of your own choice. The sanctuary of your own choice refers to prohairesis of Epictetus. In this regard, prohairesis is linked with the dichotomy of control. Practicing prohairesis, or dichotomy of control, can manage to escape from the burning thunder of hardship and distress of life. True freedom is not having what you want, but mastering the only thing truly yours, your own mind. Noesis and noema. Noesis and noema, by Husserl, corresponds to subject and object in modern idealistic philosophy. In broad sense, the subject constitutes the object. It is also valid in Husserl's phenomenology, namely, noesis determines and constitutes noema. The perceived is constituted by the conceiving. The judged is constituted by the judging. In a similar tendance, Epictetus makes use of moral choice, namely prohairesis. Prohairesis is to be explained as the practical subjectivity, or practical reason, in the sense of Kant. Husserl's noesis, namely constitutive acts of consciousness, provides a rigorous analytical structure. For Epictetus's proheresis moral choice. The following is the main text.
You are a little soul carrying around a corpse. But your proheresis is something that even Zeus cannot conquer. In Discourses of Epictetus, if you are ever hindered or disturbed, do not look for the cause elsewhere than in your own proheresis. In Enchiridion,
This connection transforms Stoic discipline from mere moral advice into a precise phenomenology of the will. It suggests that while we cannot manipulate objective facts, we maintain absolute authority over the meanings we constitute. Ultimately, this synthesis empowers the modern individual to find an unshakable center of gravity, viz., ataraxia, through transcendental subjectivity within a chaotic and fragmented world. Husserl's phenomenology of the will. The phenomenology of the will defines willing, not as a blind instinct or a mere psychological impulse, but as a meaning-giving intentional act. It explores how the I will noesis animates raw, passive experiences and constitutes them into a purposeful project or value, noema, within the subject's life world. At its core, this approach emphasizes the sovereignty of the transcendental ego. By performing the Hipachi bracketing external causal pressures and societal expectations, the subject reclaims the power to legislate the meaning of their own existence. In this sense, the will is the ultimate architect of reality. It is the faculty that transforms a world of mere facts into a world of lived significance. Through the phenomenology of the will, a person ceases to be a product of their environment and becomes the active constitutor of their own moral and ontological destiny. Transcendental theory versus transcendental praxis. As above stated, Epictetus's ethics corresponds to the transcendental practical philosophy, while Husserl's phenomenology corresponds to the transcendental epistemology. The attempt to interpret Epictetus's Stoic principles through Husserl's phenomenology creates a fascinating philosophical intersection. In particular, by utilizing Husserl's noesis-noema structure and the concept of the transcendental ego, the meaning of what is up to us, ta efhemin, can be reconstructed in a modern light. What is up to us in modern light. 1. What is up to us is the intentional act of pure consciousness, viz., noesis, the opinion, impulse, desire, and aversion listed by Epictetus correspond to what Husserl calls intentional acts of consciousness, or noesis. Stoic interpretation of what is up to us is the faculty of choice. These are not determined by the external environment, but depend solely on one's faculty of choice, viz., proheresis. Phenomenological interpretation of what is up to us is as follows. For Husserl, consciousness is not merely a passive receiver of information, but an active operation that constitutes the object. The way one judges or desires is a matter of the attitude and modality of consciousness. Thus, what is up to us is replaced by the mode of conscious operation, viz., the noetic aspect that meaningfully constitutes the world. 2. What is not up to us is posited. Reality and the natural attitude in Husserl's phenomenology. Natural attitude presupposes the reality of outside world. Body, property, and reputation appear to exist outside of consciousness and are objects that cannot be changed directly by one's will alone. Epiche and Epictetus's Dichotomy of Control. Epictetus teaches us to judge things not up to us as nothing to me. This is strikingly similar to Husserl's Epoche. It involves ceasing or bracketing the obsession with the reality of the external world and focusing solely on how the object appears to my consciousness. Epictetus's Enchiridion, chapter 5, runs as follows.
5. It is not things that disturb people, but their judgments about things. For example, death is nothing terrible. Otherwise it would have appeared so to Socrates. But the judgment that death is terrible, that is what is terrible. When, therefore, we are hindered or disturbed or grieved, let us never blame others, but ourselves, that is, our judgments. An uneducated person blames others, a partly educated person blames himself. A fully educated person blames neither others nor himself.
Enchiridion chapter 5 is the most famous passage in all of Stoic philosophy and serves as the philosophical foundation for modern psychology, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. 1. Enchiridion. Chapter 5. It is not things that disturb people, but their judgments, dogmata about things. For example, death is nothing. Terrible. Otherwise, it would have appeared so to Socrates. But the judgment that death is terrible, that is what is terrible. When, therefore, we are hindered, or disturbed, or grieved, let us never blame others, but ourselves, that is, our own judgments. An uneducated person blames others for their own misfortunes. A person who has begun to learn blames themselves. But one who has finished their education blames neither others nor themselves. 2. Core commentary. The root of suffering lies in interpretation. This passage is a powerful declaration of mental independence that liberates us from the idea of being victims of the world. Separation of event and judgment. Events that occur in the world are value neutral. It is only our minds that attach labels, such as tragedy or disaster, to these events. The example of Socrates. While the objective fact of death is the same for everyone, some tremble in fear, while Socrates calmly drank the hemlock. This proves that it is not death itself, but the interpretation of death that determines suffering. The 3 stages of blame. 1. The novice blames others and resents the environment. No freedom. 2. The intermediate blames oneself and feels guilt. In the process of change, but still in pain. 3. The master realizes that the act of blaming itself is meaningless. They accept events as they are and focus solely on correcting their own judgments. The quote from Epictetus is not merely a moral lesson. It is an invitation to fundamentally revolutionize the structure of your consciousness. When viewed through the lens of Husserl's phenomenology, it becomes a roadmap for the soul's journey toward absolute freedom. We can more precisely analyze the overmentioned 3 stages of blame as follows. Phase 1. The uneducated blames others. Phenomenological state, trapped in the natural attitude. In this stage, a person believes that the world is composed of objective, independent entities that force feelings upon them. They believe that the rude boss, or the unfair tragedy, exists out there as a solid reality. Interpretation of Phase 1. This is a state of noematic slavery. By blaming others, you surrender your constitutive power. You constitute the world as a monster, and then tremble before the very image you created. Life lesson. To say, "You made me angry," is to hand over the remote control of your happiness to a stranger. It is a confession that you are a passive object, not a conscious subject. Phase 2. The one beginning to learn blames himself. Phenomenological state. Awakening of noetic responsibility. The individual begins the phenomenological reduction. They realize that the distress does not come from the object, namely noema, but from their own mental act of judging, namely noesis. Interpretation. The gaze shifts from the outside to the inside. However, because the ego is still fragile, it turns the power of judgment against itself. Why am I so weak? Or, why did I judge this so poorly? Life lesson. You have stopped attacking the world, which is a great leap forward, but you are now attacking the architect of meaning, namely yourself. The war has moved indoors, but the peace has not yet arrived. Phase 3. The fully educated, namely, blames neither. Phenomenological state. The transcendental reduction and epoche. The master has perfected the epoche, namely, bracketing. They realize that blame itself is a faulty category. based on the illusion that external events have inherent power. Interpretation. The master stands in the center of the transcendental ego. When an insult occurs, they do not constitute it as insult noema. They see it as mere heil, namely sensory data, sound, and refuse to animate it with the meaning of hurt. By withdrawing all arbitrary value judgments, the consciousness reaches a state of pure, undisturbed clarity. Life lesson. To blame neither others nor yourself means you have reclaimed the sovereignty of meaning. You realize that nothing in the universe has the power to destroy your peace, unless you grant it that meaning. A soul-stirring realization for daily life. Blame is a confession that your consciousness has been defeated by the world. The absence of blame is proof that you have become the sole legislator of your own reality. When you embrace this, you are no longer a small boat tossed by the storm. You become the vast ocean of consciousness, observing the storm as a mere phenomenon on your surface. Today, if someone tries to disturb you, perform a silent epoché, bracket the event, strip it of its terrible label, and name it yourself. This is the ultimate freedom that Epictetus practiced in his chains, and Husserl sought in his study. The realization that you are the absolute author of the world you inhabit. The connection between Epictetus's Enchiridion, chapter 5, and Husserl's analysis of the point. Noetic, nomadic structure of higher spheres of consciousness. 93-94 of Ideas 1. The connection between Epictetus's Enchiridion, chapter 5, and Husserl's analysis of the noetic, nomadic structure of higher spheres of consciousness. 93-94 of Ideas 1 is philosophically profound. It demonstrates that Stoicism is not merely moral advice, but an intuitive phenomenology of the will. The phenomenology of the will understands the will not as mere desire or instinct, but as a meaning-creating, intentional act. It explores the process by which the noesis of I will transforms the passive, given environment heil, into a noema of subjective goals and values. The essence lies in recovering the sovereignty of meaning bestowal, whereby the subject brackets epoché, external causal pressures, to proactively constitute their own life. This is a philosophical endeavor to establish the human being, not as an object swayed by surroundings, but as a transcendental subject who freely legislates their own world. Through this, the will transcends simple choice and becomes the very constitution of one's own being. Number 1. The neutrality of the object lower noema. Epictetus states that death is nothing terrible. In Husserlian terms, death as a biological event is a simple thing noema, or a neutral state of affairs. Phenomenological interpretation. The event itself. Death does not contain the predicate of being terrible. If terribleness were an inherent quality of the object, it would appear the same to everyone. However, since it appeared differently to Socrates, the terribleness is not in the object noema, but in the constitutive act, noesis, according to Husserl's stratified meaning constitution. Our consciousness builds meaning in layers. Level 1 is the perceptual noema, a neutral event like the fact of death, while level 2 is the predicative and valuative noema, where we judge that death is terrible. As Epictetus identifies, our distress arises not from the level 1 fact, but from this stratified noema, the propositional meaning and value object we construct in the higher spheres of consciousness. This aligns perfectly with Husserl's analysis of noesis as a positional act, where judging is the act of approving, denying, or taking a stance. When we feel disturbed, it is because our noesis has performed a specific modal act, positing an external event as evil or harmful. By recognizing the sovereignty of noesis, that the judged is constituted by the judging, we see that terribleness is a product of our own mental operation. Therefore, To remove a disturbance, we must modify our noetic attitude, rather than trying to change uncontrollable external events. In Enchiridion, chapter 20, Epictetus reminds us that it is not the person who reviles or strikes you who insults you, but your own judgment that these things are insulting. The English translation of Enchiridion, chapter 20, is as follows.
Remember that it is not he who reviles you or strikes you who insults you, but it is your judgment that these things are insulting. Therefore, when anyone provokes you, be assured that it is your own opinion which provokes you. Try, therefore, in the first place, not to be hurried away with the appearance. For if you once gain time and respite, you will more easily command yourself.
In phenomenological terms, insults or blows are merely hyle or raw, passive data that has not yet been assigned a value. It is our noetic act that animates this raw material into the meaning of an insult. We suffer not because of the person out there, but because of the nomadic, meaning the insult as intended, that our own consciousness has constituted. Epictetus advises us not to be hurried away by these appearances or fantasia, which is essentially a call to perform a phenomenological epoche, or bracketing. By suspending immediate judgment and gaining respite, we reclaim the sovereignty of our prohairesis, or moral character, achieving a freedom unshaken by external stimuli. Consider a harsh criticism at work. The hyle is just loud tones and words in a room, but the reactionary judgment claims, "He is humiliating me." By performing an epoche, you see the words as mere vibrations of air, and realize your worth is a sanctuary he cannot breach unless you grant him the keys. Or consider a social media snub. The hyle is just pixels showing a party you weren't invited to, but you constitute a noema of rejection. If you withdraw your assent from the idea that your value depends on an invitation, the provocation dissolves, and you remain the transcendental subject of your own peace. Ultimately, we see that Epictetus was describing a formal complexity of consciousness that Husserl would later formalize, proving the primacy of noesis over noema. In the higher spheres of consciousness, we are not passive victims of things, but active constitutors of meaning. True Stoic freedom is the realization of our role as the transcendental constitutor of our own experienced reality. By refusing to animate raw data with painful meanings, you maintain your sovereignty. How could you apply this respite or time-gaining technique to a specific situation in your own life today?